Welcome everybody to our first of a series webinars for the Middle East from Deltares. Thank you very much for attending. My name is Robin Morelissen. I will give a brief introduction about Deltares. My role is coordinator for the Middle East for Deltares, and I'm here also with Dr. Eline Boulet, who will be our expert in the field of water and health. Also, Dr. Ahmed Al-Kadi and Mr. Hans Aldrink are in the panel of today. And we'd like to start with a few slides of overview of what Deltares is doing in the Middle East to give you a bit of an overview on the activities that we work on. Like I mentioned, this is the first of a series of webinars. We're organizing this one today. Next week, we have another webinar on digital twins for pipeline systems that will be hosted by our expert, Mr. Sam van der Zwan. And on 13th of January, we'll have an extra another webinar on the sustainable development of the Gulf, working with the Gulf community model. More on that later. But you can see the URL here where these webinars can be found, where you can enroll for these webinars. We are using the GoToWebinar software. I very much invite you to ask questions. You can put them into the Q&A session of the webinar software. And also I need to mention that this webinar is being recorded. All right. So Deltares is working in the Middle East area for more than 40 years. We cover the GCC countries around the Gulf, as well as the Red Sea countries, Egypt, Turkey, and the Levant area. Deltares is active on many iconic projects. We've been working on Palm Islands, the Khalifa Port that you can see over there, as many other types of projects in this region. And we are also present locally in the region with our office there. And we act as a knowledge partner to many different stakeholders, to many different parties for early and strategic advice on coastal developments, climate change adaptation, energy and water safety and security in the Middle East region. This shows you a list of topics that we work on. I won't mention them all, but a number of them include climate change adaptation strategies, integrated coastal zone management, integrated water resource management, groundwater modeling, water quality and ecology studies, offshore coastal engineering like the Palm Islands. We conduct a lot of numerical modeling, physical modeling in our facilities here at the campus. And we develop software, open source software. That's our firm conviction to share and be able to collaborate with different parties in the region as well. Also, we are firm on training and capacity building. So this is one of our big pillars as well. One of the projects that we carried out a few years ago is the climate change adaptation strategy that we developed for the Dubai municipality together with Acclimatize and Five Oceans, which was very well received and a very wide-ranging project on adaptation strategies. But we don't do just only these type of projects. We also act as a knowledge partner in this region. Deltares also is a not-for-profit knowledge institute, so we generate knowledge and share that around as much as we can. So we seek collaboration with local research institutes, universities, governments, markets, and see if we can jointly increase the knowledge in this region and transfer to those different stakeholders in the region. So what we aim for is start important research projects together, for example, on climate change, on coastal resilience, and many different topics. So one of the topics that we work on, for example, is the long-term impacts of desalination and climate change on the Gulf's marine environment. You see here some projections of salinity towards the future for different scenarios. We use our Delta 3D modeling software to do this, to look at water quality, ecological impacts, and this Delta 3D software is indeed open source available. To take that another step further and to be able to work together with you in the region is the initiative around the Gulf Model Community. This will also be the topic of the last webinar in January. We organize an open community in which we want to share the knowledge and the models and to give you a good start and a good basis to work together on the relevant topics in this region. This allows us to work together with universities and governments on these topics like climate change adaptation and water security. And these models will allow us to start from a common basis. So we bring the technology freely available to the region, and the local expertise comes from these different stakeholders, and hopefully we can make a positive impact on these type of topics. So we are already working with a number of partners that are shown here on this topic, and also you can find the initiative on the internet with this URL down there. We, like I mentioned, work here from Deltares with a regional team, which I have the privilege to head. Also, our Deltares GCC manager, Dr. Ahmed Al-Kadi, is looking after the GCC countries. Dr. Mohammed Youssef is looking after the Egypt, Turkey, and Levant areas. And we're all very much available for you to contact if you have any questions or ideas that you would like to share with us in this sense. This was a short introduction of Deltares itself. Now I would like to continue to introduce also Dr. Eline Boulet. We have organized this webinar series also to keep connected with you in the region now that we can't travel and visit you in person like we used to do. But we still want to share our knowledge and also invite you to think and collaborate with us, to still make a difference in this region, to still advance knowledge. And a very relevant topic that we see here is the combination of water and health. And understanding these health issues is a very important aspect of it. Water quality has been greatly improved in countries around the globe over the past years. A lot of it is based on desalination. The quality is generally very, very good. However, there are also upcoming challenges and risks with this advanced way of using water. And especially in water scarce areas like this region, a lot of water is reused, and is therefore very important to keep a lot of attention for these upcoming challenges. Deltares is seeking to team up with you, with people from the region, to strengthen the knowledge base, to work together with relevant authorities, and to solve together these challenges. Well, Dr. Eline Boulet will be introducing this topic further. After her introduction, there is a Q&A on the topic of her presentation. You're very welcome again to put your questions into the Q&A box. We will address them after that. And we would like to follow that one up with feedback questions and a panel discussion, also with Mr. Hans Aaldering there to discuss the topic for the region, and also to seek options for collaboration, see how we can advance this further. We're very interested to hear your opinion about this. A brief introduction of Dr. Boulet. She is an interdisciplinary specialist in water and health ecosystems, the interlinkages between them, with almost 30 years of experience in health and environmental impacts of water resources use and management, ranging from irrigation to drinking water supply and sanitation. This includes ecology and environment control of water-related diseases, One Health approaches, and multiple use water systems. She lived and worked several years in the Mediterranean and Asian countries. And with that, Dr. Eline, I would like to give you the floor.
Thank you, Robin. Good day, everybody. Thanks for attending this webinar. We'd like to give you an introduction on various health issues that are related to water systems, and zooming in on the issues that are important for the Middle East region and areas where we seek your collaboration. So I'll give you a little bit of an introduction. What do we mean by water quality and health risks? Which direction are we going? Then I'll basically touch on three groups of topics. One is the chemical pollutants, the other is the biological pollutants, the pathogens. The third is diseases that have a vector, like a mosquito or rats, as their intermediate. And then in plastic waste, these three come together. And I'll summarize the key messages for you. So what water quality issues are we looking at, and how do they affect human health? As I said, there's these three groups of chemical, microbiological, and vector-mediated issues, and they're related to water everywhere. As soon as the water reaches the soil, surface water, rivers, groundwater, oceans, it has to do with the way we receive the water, the way we store water, we use it and reuse it, and also how we produce wastewater and get that into the environment. Now, in the Middle East, there's the issue of water scarcity. And this aggravates water quality problems. Chemicals and chemical pollution give diseases that are less visible because they take longer time to have an impact. And they're usually linked to industry and food production, for instance, aquaculture. Microbiology-related diseases are more obvious. Maybe you will all know them, the ones that are related to drinking water and sanitation, but also hygiene-related diseases, like we now have this trachoma pandemic, the COVID-19 pandemic, that shows us how important hygiene is. And then there's the vector-related diseases that I'll discuss later. So very quickly, if we look at, this is from the Regional Office of the World Health Organization, if we look at infectious diseases in the region, we see that several are water-related. The ones in yellow are related to drinking water supply and sanitation, but you only see them in Sudan and Somalia, Afghanistan and Pakistan. Others are related to mosquitoes, like the viral diseases chikungunya and dengue. And of course, as I mentioned, now COVID-19 is everywhere, and it is mainly related to hand washing and hygiene. So there's a strong link there with the availability and the use of water. But let's go back to pollutants, the chemicals. Where do they come from? From industry, from roads, from cities, and from our food production, and of course, from garbage and waste. These are different types of pollutants. And important here is the pharmaceuticals used by people in cities, but also those used in aquaculture and dairy industry, for instance. But there's also emerging compounds like the PFOS, and there's nutrients coming from food production directly from aquaculture into the water or indirectly from cities and food production. Deltares looks at the fate and transport of these compounds. We can model the concentrations, we can monitor them and see what happens along the chain. What happens from the moment they're produced? Where do they end up? Are they polluting our beaches, for instance? What are the ecological impacts then? Do we get eutrophication when there are too many nutrients in the water body and we get algal growth? That is then a microbiological effect from a chemical pollution. But what we don't know is the impact of all this on people. So we try to monitor them as we go. One way of monitoring is through the use of passive samplers. Instead of taking one measurement at one point in time and one point in space, you can put massive passive samplers in the water for a longer time. They will collect automatically all kinds of compounds in the water over a longer time, so that you know what kind of chemicals have been in that water even for a short time. They will be absorbed by the silicon rubber and they can be analyzed. And this is a relatively simple and cheap technique, and analysis of these samples can be done locally after training. We then model this information. For instance, here is a model that we used, as Robin already mentioned. We use open source software, and then one way of processing this information is by visualization. So you can also use the results of the modeling, not only to understand what goes on and remediate, but also to inform the general public. Here is an example of a project funded by the EU. It's called solutions. And here we used a train of models, going from first the water flows, how much water flows there, then see how much of these compounds are emitted, be it in agriculture or industry or from cities. How are they transported, and how eventually are people exposed to the compounds? This is then combined with knowledge on the ecotoxicity of these compounds, or even the lethal dose. And then you can see what the impacts are on the environment, on ecosystems, on the receiving waters, but also on people. But that last part is still a little bit invisible. We are still looking we are working now on the next step, going from the final concentrations of the compounds in the water to exposure, and to see what does that do. As I said, with compounds, the impact is sometimes long-term, so it's very difficult to find out when a certain exposure to chemicals leads to certain symptoms. So that requires a whole different way of looking at it and checking how are people exposed and what are the long-term impacts. For this, we have to collaborate with health institutes to understand what their knowledge is and what is the prevalence, occurrence of intoxication, long-term chronic exposure of chemicals, and what does it do. Next, microbiology and early warning. Here, again, we have cities and food production as sources of pathogens. Pathogens are the agents that cause disease. They can be bacteria, viruses, but can also be algae in the water. They're linked to climate change. As it gets hotter, we may find more algal blooms, and bacteria in the water may behave differently from what they did before. Of course, this is linked to sewerage systems, and this is worldwide an issue. In areas where there is less coverage of sanitation facilities, there's more direct pollution of the environment. But in other countries where there are good sewerage systems, there's still exposure, there is still transport from cities and food production into our water through drains, through combined sewer systems, overflows, and with floods. So we look at the health risks of these. We try to predict when there will be an outbreak of certain pathogens by monitoring them, by modeling them, and try to forecast. And we also look at emergencies because we can learn a lot from these. Another issue related to microbiology is antimicrobial resistance. I'll get back to that in a bit. And as I already mentioned, there's the eye and skin infections and airborne diseases like COVID-19 that can be prevented by clean water. So all these are under the heading of microbiology and early warning. So here we use this conceptual, well, it's not a model, but more like a graphic to show you where we work on and what we do. So we start with the sources. Where do these pathogens come from? We measure the concentrations, see what happens along transport in the groundwater, what happens in wastewater treatment plants, how eventually that ends up in surface water, and then how are people exposed? For instance, if they are at the beach and bathing in the seawater, can they be exposed to these pathogens? And is the drinking water that we get finally clean? And all these, along the chain, we can also identify measures for prevention. Already mentioned antimicrobial resistance. This is mentioned as by the World Health Organization as one of the future global health threats. Right now, there are about 700,000 deaths each year globally that can be attributed to antimicrobial resistance. Our antibiotics aren't working anymore because the the bacteria are getting resistant, and this resistance is spreading through the environment. Now that's worrisome, and it's a bit of a black box. We know that the resistant genes get into the environment from sewage from cities and in particular hospitals, but also from aquaculture and other food production. And then we find out that in wastewater treatment plants, these genes come together in a high nutritionous environment, and then the resistant genes sort of hop over from the fecal bacteria into environmental bacteria, and from there on spread. But this spreading is something we don't know much about, and we don't know how important the role of the environment is. So that is something we are looking at. We're monitoring wastewater and outflows and trying to assess the impact where that water goes to. Because we don't want that this prediction comes true, that in a couple of years there may be 10 million people dying from antimicrobial resistance because the drugs aren't working anymore. So we have to understand what happens in the environment. How do we do all this monitoring of pathogens? Well, one way of doing this is by using mobile qPCR. Normally, if you do a PCR test, you know that from the COVID tests, this goes to a lab and you need to wait at least 24 hours for a result. Now, with this tool, you can get results within half an hour on site. So that is very nice. For instance, if you have an event like the picture here, a swimming event in Amsterdam, where you want to know the water quality a day in advance. And here, in this case, in 2018, we were asked by the municipality to measure the water quality. This is done routinely every other week. So there was an extra monitoring using this technique. And we found out that the levels of E. coli were too high in the water. So if the event would have been held, many people would have fallen ill. So actually it was cancelled. An application is then, for instance, on forecasting bathing water quality. In Europe, there's the directive for bathing water coming from the EU, and that prescribes that bathing water locations are monitored every other week. Samples are taken, analyzed, and if the water quality is poor, the beach is closed. But that's usually after the event, so people are already contaminated. So here in the UK was a study where weather models and climate data were put together and combined with the sewer outflow, and to predict what the water quality would be on these bathing sites. And so then you could be there in advance, give an early warning and say, no, don't swim today, don't, because you may get ill. So this can be also applied to algal blooms. These are nasty because if you get blue-green algae in your reservoir and you want to use that water for drinking water, you can't get it out. It's a toxin. It's very difficult to get rid of once it's in the water. So it would be very useful to have a forecasting system and know when to close off your intake for your drinking water treatment plant, but also for other waters where you may have fishing activities or recreational activities. So Deltares uses a combination of data from satellite imagery, direct measurements, indirect measurements, and then modeling. And some of these are then entered into our overall hydrological models in Fuse, and then processed and used into a management system. So actually these are then used for forecasting. Now, what does it look like? This is a forecast of a lake in the Netherlands, where algal blooms are forecasted with 2 weeks notice. And the redder the area, the more algal blooms on the surface of the water. So in this case, the authorities responsible for the bathing sites in this lake and recreational activities could decide to close a beach if the warning was too high, if the area was supposed to be red the next day. Just a bit of technical background. This is an example of how it works and how the models are calibrated. This is from Italy, same idea, algal bloom forecasting. And in the top graph, you see in red the standard model, and in blue, you see the measured values. There's a bit of a discrepancy. So what then happens is validation of the model, and the model is adapted after each measurement. And that is what happens in the third graph, and in the second graph, you see the same points connected. So you get a much better fit. And the lower graph shows that the actual adaptation from the model, how it is calibrated. So this is something that might be very interesting also for the Middle East region, and something we are eager to collaborate with you on. A more actual current topic is the monitoring of the SARS-CoV-2 in wastewater. This is something we do in collaboration with KWR. And here you can use the virus in the wastewater as a predictor of a new outbreak. And you can use that if you know that the virus is increasing in a certain neighborhood, for instance, because that one drains in a certain wastewater treatment plant, you can intensify your measurements there, monitor the population more intensely, or scale up your measures. Last topic, vector-related diseases. I already mentioned the viruses that can be transmitted by mosquitoes. In the past, we also had malaria in the region. Now coming up are issues like West Nile fever, Rift Valley fever, dengue fever. West Nile fever is already coming up in the Netherlands, so we are keen on looking at this. Vector-related diseases also includes diseases where snails play a role, like schistosomiasis, very important health issue in Egypt, for instance, and leptospirosis that is related to the presence of rats. So again, here is a link to all kinds of surface water bodies, and there's a variety of pathogens. An example, as I said, in the Netherlands, we're worried about this, and we have a One Health project that tries to understand, when do we get an epidemic? When do we go from a few cases to a true epidemic? And this project focuses on viruses transmitted by mosquitoes, like dengue and West Nile virus. And we try to understand what happens if you turn these buttons. What happens if climate changes? What happens if we travel more, or if we change our environment? A special word on plastic, because plastic is where various of these health impacts related to water come together. There is the direct health impact of plastic, that you may ingest micro or even nano-sized plastic particles through food or through fish, through drinking water, and these have an impact on the human body that we are only starting to understand. But plastics, when they get into water, they leach chemicals. They leach the solvents, they leach colorants, all kinds of chemical substances that leak from the plastic into the water. At the same time, we see that plastic in the water may become a substrate for pathogens. If you leave a piece of plastic in the water for some time, you will get bacterial growth. and this plastic may then be a vehicle and transported along the river into the oceans. And also plastics can provide shelter for mosquito larvae and protect them against predators. So the issue of plastic pollution is linked to these 3 chapters of health impacts. And at Deltares, we look at the various steps going from plastic waste to health impacts. We collaborate with university to look at the medical impacts. We look at the spread of plastic particles and try to model these. We monitor what happens with the pathogens on it, and we work on removal technologies. Like, for instance, here you see a bubble screen in one of the rivers in the Netherlands, and the bubbles, they create a diversion, and all the plastic from in the water floating deep or at the surface is diverted to the site where it can be caught. Summarizing, Deltares works on issues of water and health from the source to the human impact, where we work with people who are in the sources of the water up to medical and biomedical and public health partners that look at the health impacts. And we focus on what goes on in between. What happens between the sources and the infection? How can we monitor? How can we model? How can we forecast? And these are then the issues that we would like to partner with you on in the region. Chemicals, microbiology, early warning, vector-related diseases, and the various issues related to plastic waste and human health impacts. So we thank you very much for your attention.
All right. I see that we did not receive yet some questions on the Q&A box. This is not too late yet. So if you have any questions about this interesting and wide-ranging topic of Dr. Eline Boulet, please ask them in the Q&A box. There are a few questions actually that came up to me, Eline, that I was thinking about, because a number of the topics that you mentioned are highly relevant to the region. One of them is obviously the reuse of treated sewage effluent, which is a big agenda point in the policy there. My question is, this type of knowledge, how can it assist sewage treatment plants, the policy collection of sewage treatment, and the reuse of TSE? Where do you find lacks in knowledge? Where do you think that this knowledge can add value to?
Thank you for that question. I think the most important point where we can help here or collaborate on is looking at the wastewater quality that goes into the plant and that goes out, and help monitor and forecast, because some compounds, as I showed in my presentation, cannot easily be removed by treatment plants. And so that means that the water you get out of the treatment plant may not be usable for the same purpose you want to use it for. So you have to be careful. You have to know what is the quality of the water that goes in and what is the quality of the water that goes out, and then support that and advise on what you can use it for.
Thank you. That's a very good point to take into mind. And if we look at the forecasting, the prediction, wider range, also the bathing water is a big issue, or a big topic at least, also of course for the region, where tourist industry is increasing, where there's a lot of visions around to increase that type of recreation. If you look at this type of forecasting, what are the main challenges still for us to tackle, the main uncertainties should be focusing our research on, basically?
Yeah, that's a very good question, because first you need to know what are the most important health risks for the region. They may be different from the UK. They may be different from the Netherlands. So you will first want to check that, see what are the most important issues. Well, probably algal blooms is a big one, and that is definitely one that you need to look into. But then there are different types of cyanobacteria, and you need to know which one. So you look at that, and then you can start the modeling and start the forecasting. So again, it's a combination of measuring, monitoring, and forecasting, as in the example from the Netherlands.
Yeah. Yeah, indeed, harmful algal blooms is definitely a topic that is very known to the region. Particularly Oman has big blooms every year, increasing in intensity often. So there's a big need to predict them, to forecast them. That comes with its own challenges, using remote sensing, etc. It affects the desalination plants, the intakes, it clogs the membranes. On the other hand, also it results in fish kills. It may accumulate in shellfish, which is also a major source of food in the region. What do you reckon? Is that especially when it enters the food chain, is that something that there is new knowledge now with this approach that we can deal with these topics, that we can provide policy, provide guidelines on how and when to deal with it?
Definitely. Thank you. Good question. Once it's in the fish, in the shellfish, there's nothing we can do other than not eat it. So that is definitely something we need to know, if the water, if the food items are contaminated or not. But what is important when looking at algal blooms is the entire catchment. You cannot look at algal blooms in isolation, because there's a link with eutrophication. You need to look at the upper watershed, see what happens. Is there erosion? Do we get more sediment into our reservoirs, into our water bodies, so that these become rich in nutrient? And sometimes it's just a little bit too rich. It doesn't have to be super rich. But if it gets too many nutrients in the water, then you get algal blooms, and these may be the harmful cyanobacteria. But there are measures you can take. I showed the bubble screen to remove plastics, but there are also techniques to aerate water and turn over the water column, get more mixing, and then get less algal growth. So it is something you can tackle, but you have to know the entire chain from where it starts upstream till where it reaches the food.
Thank you very much, Elina. That's very useful to know. Actually, I would like to move towards our discussion, which I also want to give floor to you as our attendants to ask questions. I've got a number of questions that I would like to ask you. I see some questions coming in right now as well. Thank you very much for that. Let's see if we can tackle those ones first. After that, I will also pose a question or two to you as the audience, which you may respond to using your own audio. If you would like to do so, please raise your digital hand so that we know that that we can give you the floor. And I would like to remind you again that this session is being recorded, so that means that you will be recorded as well. Hopefully that's not a problem. We got a question in saying how large the areas are that could be resolved with aeration in algal blooms.
A good question, and to be honest, I don't know right away. What I do know is that in certain countries, quite large lakes are aerated, and so often it's a matter of resources. How much money do you want to spend on this? The technology is there, so I don't know if any of my colleagues want to add to this answer.
Perhaps we can also give the floor to Hans, who is also in the panel, not physically here, but Hans, can you add to this perhaps?
Yes, thank you, Robin. Well, in the Netherlands, a number of big drinking reservoirs are aerated to increase the vertical mixing, to decrease algal growth, but also a number of recreational lakes. And they go, well, the question was on the size of these lakes. They go up to, let's say, 50 to 100 hectares. That is technology that is readily available and can be used.
Good. Thank you very much, Hans, for that. That's really good to know. Another question came in about the detection of the different pathogens and how much is that, well, fixed to a certain climate, certain temperature in the Gulf area, having how much higher temperatures than, for example, in Northern European waters. Can you comment on that, Aline, how that works?
Yeah, well, what you first have to do is you have to validate your methodology. So the approach is the same where you apply it. And currently the same approach of measuring virus in wastewater is applied in many countries in the world already, in Europe, but also in Latin America and in African countries in Asia. I am not, I can't give you a list of countries, but I do know is that the approach is always the same, and that you start with some testing and you see if your methodology works there. And of course, you then correct for temperatures.
Thank you very much again, Aline. A question from my end to you as the audience. I'm very interested to know if you recognize the topics that Aline just presented on, the microbial resistance, the plastics, the pharmaceuticals, these topics that we have been discussing now. Do you see this also emerging in the Middle East region? And do you see it's on the policy agenda, something that has attention at the moment? Is there research being done, perhaps? How does this topic reflect and land in this area? Is there someone in the audience that would like to respond to that? Please raise your hand. Yes, Yusuf Al-Azari, good to have you. Thank you very much. I hear you would like to respond. Please go ahead.
So, sorry, Robin, I had a question, to tell the truth, not responding to that.
That's also good.
Okay, thanks, Robin. Great to hear you, and great to get in touch with other participants and colleagues in Deltares. I'm just wondering, has there been any attempts to monitor algal blooms using remotely sensed data, especially in our areas? Well, I'm not talking about the Arabian Sea, because algal bloom in the Arabian Sea could last for a few days or even few months, if I'm not mistaken. But for short algal blooms, and having seen that many satellites doesn't pass very frequent over our area, has there been any attempt to monitor, or techniques or procedures to monitor utilizing some satellite images?
Well, thank you for your question. That would be fantastic if that were the case. To tell you the truth, I don't know if that is happening, but we can check, and I would welcome you to send us an email after this session so we can follow up with you, and I'll bring in my colleagues from the who work on.
Great. I have thoughts of, for example, capturing surface algal blooms, and then from there try to replicate on a model, and then run the model and see how this disperse and progress. But because I don't have much knowledge on algal blooms, as you know, as probably Robin know that I'm not a biologist, but then we need to know the behavior of those blooms and how long they last in warm seas, for example, as ours. That would be a great idea, I think, to see and explore.
Yeah,
I agree, Yusuf. I think that's a very good idea. On one of the slides that Elena showed, you saw a handheld device, which is actually also monitoring. So that makes it possible to do it from the sides. So that gives you at least an indication of concentrations, and well, perhaps drones, but that's also preaching to the converted. I think, Yusuf, maybe we can use drones.
We do now, just launching, just starting, in fact, a drone with a thermal sensor that can detect, different temperatures. And if, for example, a dark patch appears on the sea surface, we can detect that. We've been testing this, and still, the way is still not clear. But then maybe it's a good attempt to do so.
Yeah, no, I agree, Yusuf, and I think indeed our colleague Dr. Miguel Dionysio is a very big expert together with Anouk on the type of algae and their biology. So perhaps indeed it's an interesting topic to discuss further. Let's do that.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you as well, Yusuf. Perhaps on the question I posed, I mean, this is definitely one of the big topics in the region. We all recognize that already. On these emerging health and water combinations, do you see, is somebody want to respond to that, perhaps? Oh, Dr. Dawood, I heard that you have raised your hand. Thank you for being here. Very good to have you in our session. Would you like to respond to a question?
Actually, it is not a question, more than like a clarification of that. But one of the main challenges that we are facing in GCC, or building on what have been mentioned by Dr. Yasser, in addition to the algae bloom, but also increasing the ambient marine water salinity. We face this challenging, and because we have now plans in GCC region to change from the thermal desalination processes to membrane desalination based processes. And because of the increasing salinity, there is a lot of question mark and the challenging to change the thermal to membrane desalination. Up till now, we don't have enough evidence or enough data to either monitoring data or other data, satellite imagery data, to indicate what is the trend in the salinity increase, ambient salinity increase of the marine water in the Gulf. Some studies indicating that there is a trend of increasing the salinity. Do you have any information about the trend of the ambient salinity of the Arabian Gulf? And what is the future of this?
Yeah, that's a very good question, Dr. Dawood. As you are aware, there have been a number of studies on the topic in the past. And unfortunately, they are kind of contradictory. So it's definitely a topic of still ongoing research. This has major attention on our end as well with the community model that I presented in the introduction. This is one of the major topics we're trying to look into. And I think that's also something that is very relevant for the future of the Gulf. The ideas are that there is, of course, an exchange of water through the Strait of Hormuz with the water coming from the Arabian Sea. So with increasing temperatures, with increasing winds, you get increasing evaporation. With increasing evaporation, you can get increasing salinities, particularly in the lower flushed coastal areas. But if the salinity increases, also the exchange mechanism with the Strait of Hormuz will intensify. So there will be a new equilibrium. Variation in values we can also expect. Because I think that's very important of the ecology. How much can we increase that? We know for fact already that the Gulf, for example, is a very high stressed environment. If you look at the ecological drivers, the type of mangroves, the type of other fauna, flora is at the edge of what they can handle. So that's already naturally the case. So the problem would be when salinity starts to increase more than that ecology can cope with or grow along with, then you might find effects. It's a difficult prediction to make on what kind of trend you would see. The things that we did a study last year as well that shows that it's highly regional. There are certain regions that on the brink of climate change are expected to increase in salinity. Some may even decrease because of changes in circulations in the Gulf. But it's definitely, and I stress and I agree with you, it's a very important topic to look at, and particularly with EAD, for example, very important partner to look in how can we combine the data, the models that are available, to see if we can make a step further in that, and also to be able to derive good strategic and sustainable policy for water security in the region. Does that answer your question, Dr. Dawood? I circumvented it a little bit, I realized.
Yes, it's fine now, but we need to dig it a little bit more in the future and to see how we can assess the trend in the ambient water salinity increase.
Yes, I
Thank you very much, Robin. Thanks, Doctor.
Thank you. I'm just looking at the director. Do we have any other raised hands at the moment? No. So I think we covered a number of very interesting topics here. Again, I would like to stress and express our interest to collaborate with you, with the people just also responding to our questions. These are also the institutes in the region that are dealing with these type of topics. It's very interesting to us to work together. In view of time, I think I will just start to wrap up. I would like to invite you, if there's anything that you would like to respond to, ask, or elaborate on, please find the email addresses over there. Also, we will leave the session a little bit open so that you have the opportunity to still file your questions through the Q&A box. We will respond to each and every one of them, perhaps after the session, and we are very much looking forward to be in touch with you and discuss this important topic. And hopefully this will lead to a good partnership and research and collaboration with the region. Any closing remark from you, Eileen?
No, just thank you very much. And as my colleague said, we are eager to collaborate with you. If there are any additional issues, questions you would like to discuss, please send us an email and we can follow up and see if we can maybe set up some joint research together.
Thank you very much. Hans, still on the panel. Maybe any closing remarks from your end?
Well, actually, not very much to add, but I'm also looking forward to your to see any opportunities for further cooperation. A number of issues have been mentioned on algal growth, and I'm quite sure that there are several options to cooperate on that together, and we will contact you on that later. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Hans. I would like to extend my thanks to all you attendees and your time that you invested in this. Thank you very much for being here. Next week we have our next webinar on the 16th of December, same time, on digital twinning on pipeline flows, which is also a very exciting development we're working on. In January we will discuss the community model further, which relates to the question that Dr. Dawood mentioned as well. I hope to welcome you again in these webinars. For now, I would like to thank you for being here, and please, if you like, share the recordings of this webinar with your colleagues and reach out to us if we can be of any assistance to you. Thank you again, and hope to see you soon in real life again. Stay healthy and see you soon. Thank you.